There's a suitcase crossing an ocean right now. Inside it, no fortune, no guarantee, just a belief that somewhere on Earth exists a place where your last name doesn't write your future. While critics abroad dismiss it as naive greed and those born here take it for granted, millions still abandon everything familiar for American soil. But they're not chasing houses or cars. They're pursuing something psychological, something those who've never lived without it can't fully comprehend: the radical right to own your own destiny. What they understand about America might be what America itself is forgetting. There exists a fundamental misunderstanding about what drives human beings to uproot their entire existence for a country they've never seen. The world watches America through a lens of materialism, counting square footage and calculating salaries, assuming the dream is measured in possessions accumulated and comfort achieved. This interpretation misses the psychological foundation entirely. What pulls people across borders isn't the promise of wealth, but the promise of agency, the psychological freedom to fail spectacularly or succeed beyond imagination without a government official, a family lineage, or a social caste system standing as gatekeeper to possibility. Consider the emotional architecture of living in a society where permission precedes action, where starting a business requires navigating bureaucratic labyrinths designed to protect established interests rather than encourage innovation, where your educational opportunities are determined at age 14 by standardized examinations that funnel you into predetermined tracks, where questioning authority isn't seen as civic engagement but as dangerous insubordination. The psychological weight of such systems creates a specific kind of suffocation, not always visible in economic statistics, but profoundly felt in the human spirit. It's the suffocation of potential unrealized, of ideas unexplored, of a future written before you had the chance to hold the pen. The American psychological contract operates on a radically different premise. It doesn't guarantee outcomes but protects the process of self-determination. This distinction confuses those who've never experienced its absence. The constitutional framework wasn't designed to ensure everyone succeeds, but to ensure everyone has the unobstructed right to try. This creates a unique emotional landscape where failure carries no permanent social stigma because the system allows for reinvention. Bankruptcy doesn't brand you for life. A failed venture doesn't close all future doors. This psychological safety net, paradoxically built not from government support, but from cultural acceptance of risk, enables a relationship with ambition that other societies often view with suspicion. Those who immigrate with clear eyes understand something profound about human psychology. They recognize that dignity doesn't come from security provided, but from autonomy exercised. The emotional satisfaction of building something from nothing, of seeing direct correlation between effort and outcome, of knowing that no distant bureaucrat can arbitrarily revoke what you've earned, creates a psychological ownership of life itself that dependence can never replicate. This isn't about rejecting community or embracing selfishness. It's about the fundamental human need to author your own story rather than inherit a pre-written script. The confusion about American identity often stems from conflating means with ends. The houses, the cars, the consumer goods, these are byproducts, not purposes. They represent visible markers of something invisible, the exercise of choice in a system designed to maximize individual decision-making authority. When foreigners criticize American materialism, they're often observing the symptoms while missing the underlying psychology. The accumulation isn't the point. The freedom to accumulate, to choose not to accumulate, to succeed, to fail, to start over, this optionality is the point. What threatens this understanding isn't external criticism, but internal amnesia. Generations born into freedom often mistake it for the natural state of humanity rather than a carefully constructed and vigorously defended anomaly in human history. They experience the benefits without understanding the psychological contrast. They've never felt the weight of a system that treats human potential as something to be managed rather than unleashed. They've never experienced the emotional claustrophobia of societies, where innovation is viewed as disruption to be controlled rather than progress to be celebrated. The psychological resilience required to choose uncertainty over inherited security reveals something essential about human nature. It demonstrates that given the choice, millions consistently select freedom with risk over comfort with constraint. This preference isn't irrational or naive. It reflects a deep understanding that psychological well-being requires more than physical security. It requires the belief that your life belongs to you, that your potential isn't capped by forces beyond your control, that the future remains unwritten and therefore full of possibility. This psychological framework of freedom creates a distinct relationship with time itself. In systems built on inherited position and bureaucratic permission, the future often feels predetermined, a slow unfolding of circumstances largely beyond individual control. The emotional experience becomes one of waiting, of hoping external forces align favorably, of accepting that life's trajectory was essentially established at birth. The American psychological contract inverts this entirely. Time becomes a resource to be invested rather than endured. The future transforms from a fate to be accepted into a canvas to be painted. This shift in temporal psychology explains why the concept resonates so powerfully with those who've experienced the alternative. They recognize that freedom isn't merely about what you can do today, but about who you can become tomorrow. The emotional architecture of this system rests on a principle that sounds simple, but proves psychologically revolutionary. The belief that human potential is essentially unknowable and therefore shouldn't be constrained by external prediction creates a culture that treats ambition as legitimate regardless of origin. A janitor's child isn't viewed as destined for janitorial work. An immigrant's accent doesn't permanently cap their professional ceiling. Educational credentials matter less than demonstrated capability. This meritocratic psychology, imperfect in execution but foundational in principle, generates an emotional environment where aspiration feels rational rather than delusional. What makes this psychological state difficult to explain is its invisibility to those who've never experienced its absence. Freedom, like health, often goes unnoticed until it's lost. Those born into systems that protect individual liberty rather than grant conditional permissions rarely develop the comparative framework necessary to recognize how unusual their circumstances are. They experience the benefits without understanding the contrast. They've never felt the psychological weight of needing permission to pursue education, to change careers, to relocate, to start a business, to express unpopular opinions without fearing government retribution. The absence of these constraints becomes invisible, mistaken for the default human condition rather than a carefully maintained exception. This creates a dangerous vulnerability. When freedom is experienced as normal rather than exceptional, the psychological vigilance required to maintain it atrophies. The emotional understanding of what's at stake diminishes. Political discussions focus on redistributing outcomes rather than protecting the processes that enable individual achievement. The psychological shift from protecting opportunity to guaranteeing results fundamentally alters the relationship between individual and state, transforming citizens from autonomous agents into dependent clients. The immigrants who arrive understanding what they're choosing often possess a psychological clarity that native-born citizens lack. They've experienced the emotional reality of systems where government acts as gatekeeper rather than protector. They've felt the frustration of bureaucracies that view individual initiative as something to be managed rather than encouraged. They've lived the psychological suffocation of societies that prioritize collective harmony over individual expression. This experiential knowledge creates an appreciation that abstract understanding cannot replicate. The psychological resilience this system demands shouldn't be romanticized. Choosing freedom over security requires tolerating uncertainty that many find unbearable. The emotional burden of knowing your success or failure rests primarily on your own decisions creates anxiety that dependence eliminates. There's genuine psychological comfort in systems that provide predetermined paths, that make major life decisions collectively, that distribute resources according to formulas rather than individual effort. The American psychological contract offers something different, not easier, but more aligned with the human need for autonomy and self-determination. Understanding this distinction reveals why the concept remains so misunderstood. Those observing from outside see the stress, the competition, the inequality of outcomes, and conclude the system is broken. They miss the psychological trade-off being made. The acceptance of unequal results in exchange for equal opportunity. The embrace of risk in pursuit of self-determination. The willingness to fail spectacularly for the chance to succeed authentically. This isn't ignorance or false consciousness. It's a conscious choice about which psychological burdens are worth bearing and which human needs matter most. The psychological architecture of the American dream reveals itself most clearly in its final truth. It belongs to those who consciously choose it, not to those who passively inherit it. This ownership transcends geography and birthright, residing instead in the emotional understanding of what freedom actually costs and what it genuinely provides. The dream doesn't promise comfort or certainty. It offers something far more valuable and infinitely more demanding: the psychological space to become whoever you possess the courage and capability to be. This distinction matters profoundly because it exposes why criticism from those who've never experienced its absence rings hollow. Observers who've lived their entire lives within systems protecting constitutional liberty often mistake their circumstances for universal human conditions rather than exceptional historical achievements requiring constant maintenance. They critique inequality of outcomes while remaining psychologically blind to the equality of opportunity that makes varied results inevitable. They demand security without recognizing that guaranteed outcomes require surrendering the autonomy that makes individual achievement meaningful. The immigrants who arrive understanding this trade-off carry a psychological clarity that cannot be taught through abstract discussion. They've experienced the emotional suffocation of systems where potential is capped by factors beyond individual control. They've felt the frustration of bureaucracies treating ambition as something requiring permission rather than protection. They've lived the psychological reality of societies prioritizing collective harmony over individual expression, where standing out invites punishment rather than possibility. This experiential knowledge creates appreciation that intellectual understanding cannot replicate. What foreigners fundamentally misunderstand is that the American dream operates as a psychological contract, not an economic guarantee. It promises the freedom to pursue, not the certainty of achieving. It protects the right to attempt, not the assurance of success. This framework creates emotional burdens that many find unbearable. The anxiety of knowing your trajectory depends primarily on your decisions rather than predetermined paths. The psychological weight of understanding that failure reflects your choices rather than systemic barriers. The discomfort of living without the safety nets that dependency provides. Yet this psychological burden creates something irreplaceable: authentic ownership of your life's direction. Achievements earned through individual effort carry emotional weight that redistributed outcomes cannot match. The pride of building rather than receiving. The self-respect that comes from overcoming obstacles through personal capability rather than bureaucratic intervention. The profound sense of agency that emerges when you recognize your potential isn't artificially capped by government gatekeepers or social planners. This explains why those who consciously select this system often defend it more passionately than those born within it. They've experienced the psychological alternative. They've lived the emotional reality of systems that provide security by limiting possibility, that reduce anxiety by reducing autonomy, that eliminate the fear of failure by eliminating the opportunity for exceptional success. They've made the comparison and chosen differently, not out of ignorance but from informed preference, about which psychological burdens align with human dignity and which human needs matter most. The American dream isn't naive optimism or capitalist propaganda. It's a sophisticated psychological framework built on the radical, premise that individual liberty constitutes an inalienable right rather than a government-granted privilege. This foundation creates a unique national character that puzzles those who've never experienced such comprehensive self-determination. It produces a society that tolerates inequality of outcomes specifically because it insists on equality of opportunity. It generates a culture that celebrates ambitious risk-taking precisely because it protects the freedom to fail spectacularly. Understanding this reveals the dream's true ownership. It belongs to those who recognize freedom's psychological architecture, who understand that liberty demands more than it promises, who accept that self-determination requires bearing burdens that dependency eliminates. It belongs to those crazy enough to believe that human potential shouldn't be managed by bureaucrats or capped by birthright. It belongs to anyone willing to choose it, regardless of where they were born, because choosing it demonstrates the psychological understanding that inheritance cannot provide. If this changed your perspective on the American dream, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the truth others are too comfortable to see.